Welcome, fellow nerds, to the Swiftly Nerd Pokemon Research Lab. Standing right here is myself, Swiftly. I'm so happy that you have decided to pay a visit, as I'm currently attempting one of the greatest challenges a Pokemon collector, or researcher such as myself, could ever dream of. The codename is the Instance Dex, but it's described more as a complete Pokedex of every Pokemon from every region possible, plus any extra forms, gender variants, and other niche features it may have. I like to call these instances, though it's a bit vague, as there are technically infinite instances of just one Pokemon species considering natures, EVs, IVs, ability, shininess, but that's beside the point. Though, what defines a Pokemon instance? I like to consider it as just the species itself, the original trainer either being your own or from some other trainer in the game, whether it has a gender variant or not, if so what gender it is, what form it is if applicable, and what origin, region, and mark it has. Every Pokemon has an origin, region, and mark denoted in Pokemon storage centers with a symbol in the name of the region. For example, this Clefairy has a symbol of a plus sign and an origin region of Alola, meaning it is a Pokemon from Sun and Moon or Ultra Sun and Moon. There's also a few bonuses to include, such as Gigantamax symbols and whether the Pokemon came from a trade or another method with a different OT found in that game. With that out of the way, let us begin with the documentation of the first leg of my journey, the Generation 3 games, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, and Leaf Green. We'll begin with Hoenn, as it was the first set of games released. When considering the amount of Pokemon we need from these games, you will need around 5 playthroughs to get everything necessary from these games. 3 will be from Emerald, while you need an additional playthrough each of Ruby and Sapphire. Starting off with Emerald, my first file was also my main file, being used to catch pretty much anything possible within those games. If a Pokemon could be obtained, main story or post-game, I was obtaining it in this file. Though it does contain a huge chunk of the Hoenn Pokedex, not everything could be obtained on just one file. This, mixed in with a few post-game exclusive Pokemon that required a full Hoenn Dex, it made getting everything in these 3 files so crucial. But focusing on the first file for now, I chose my starter and immediately got to work catching everything I could find. My strategy essentially boiled down to finding the areas where a Pokemon species was found, and choosing the one that either had the highest encounter rate, or was the earliest area I could find if it had multiple areas with the highest rate. Of course, if I found the species in an area I didn't plan to catch it in, I wasn't just gonna let it go and look later on. I'd try to catch it at that point. I also did usually try and look for multiple of that species so that I could get gender variants and future evolutions that I can grind later on. I like to consider the main story a very free experience, since all it really does is unlock new areas for you to obtain stuff, and you're in control of what you want to catch, when you want to catch it, and more. The only issue is that you're limited in the money you make and the areas you can access until you complete more of the story. Which, if you thought I was going to talk about this, you'd be mistaken. I'm a researcher in catching Pokemon, not a storyteller. Plus, I'd imagine most of you watching this already know of the Hoenn storyline, or at least don't mind skipping out on it in favor of me showing all the beautiful mods I collected throughout. Though, not all of them were obtained in the main story, if you could tell. As I said, this section is very flexible, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of you choose to not do much in the main story so that you'd have more resources in the post-game. I only really consider this a main story section because all of these Pokemon can be obtained before completing the Pokemon League, which is often considered the end of the game. If you are curious, by the way, about how many Pokemon you unlock per badge or section of the game, I recommend the Professor Oak's challenge, which is kinda similar to this, except it's more so catching everything before each section, and it doesn't involve forms and whatnot like in my challenge. I like to think of this as the most comprehensive a Pokedex can get, without it being too ridiculously hard or time-consuming. Though it is still challenging and time-consuming. Yeah, I know, am I being a bit braggy? I guess, but I'm also the one wasting so many days of my life doing this challenge, so who really is the winner here? I guess you are because you're watching this video. Sorry, I rambled a bit too long there. Back to some more tips and tricks. In terms of Pokemon I wouldn't catch multiple of, it'd only really be the ones who have incredibly low encounter rates all over the region, even in the post-game. These are mons with below 10% encounter rates, and even finding one of them is pretty annoying. Thankfully, once you get one, you usually don't have to aim for another in the wild. If you get a female, you can just breed one with a male from another egg group to get extra, or you can always just wait until the post-game to gain access to Ditto and make everything so much easier. Besides those mons, the only ones I really consider for breeding would be Marill to get a Zero, which you need to breed said Marill while it's holding a Sea Incense, Pichu, Igglybuff, and the starters. Which, now would be a good time to talk about my other files of Emerald. Main story-wise, the remaining 2 files really didn't do much since a lot of the work needed to be done in the post-game, but I did make sure to catch and evolve a lot of Pokemon in-game, until I had to have the Pokedex registered. If you didn't know, that's 100. I'll explain why when we get to the post-game section. But for the main dex, I only needed to grab the other 2 starters, which I could easily deposit upon completing the game and breeding in my main file to get more. A few other things to consider when completing this section is to consider your time. Try to bring some higher level evolutions when possible to different parts of the game, so that when you need to grind everything later on, you'll have a good chunk of experience to start. It might be close anyway. Don't bother saving the lower level evolutions for later. Instead, grind them up in an earlier part of the game so that you may have options for later battles if you get stuck. Or you could use it also as a chance to shiny hunt. Or in my case, just randomly stumble across shinies.
So, hi, this is Swiftly, coming from, just grinding in Pokemon Emerald. And I found this shiny Poochyena just chilling. He's gonna be the mascot of this run. Please catch. I don't want to fail this, thank you. I'm just gonna call her Sandy. It's a boring name, but Sandy's gonna be the mascot of the run. So, there's Sandy the shiny. This is my second full-on shiny in this game. So yeah, there's Sandy. With a nice shiny color.
Yeah. I did end up getting a shiny during the grinding sections. I mean, considering Emerald's odd quirks of generating Pokemon, I was bound to get one eventually, so I just considered this a freebie. There can't be any more, right? Right? Moving on back to other things to consider, there are some Pokemon only available, or at least harder to obtain, via gifts. The starters are one such example, but the fossils too, as you only get one in-game in the main story. You do get the opposite fossil in the post-game, as you'll find out later, but you can choose to get the other fossil in the second or third files and save a bit of breeding time by getting an extra of one of them. There's also the gift Why Not egg you get hatch in Lava Ridge Town, the cast form from the Weather Institute, and Kecleon, which is technically not a gift mod, but I really didn't know where else to talk about it, so yeah, use your goggles to get guaranteed one and don't even bother trying to get it with the 1% encounter. Of course, there are also Pokemon that evolve only via evolution, trade with an item, stuff like that. For stones, there are a bunch scattered throughout the region, but I would highly recommend going to the Shard person. You can find shards randomly around diving routes, specifically underwater, and if you give them to the Shard man, he will give you a stone in exchange. So it's a lot easier of getting the stones than to just get them in the game in the various files, because you will need a lot of them to get the gender variants and maybe other forms. As for the trade items, there only really is a couple that you need. The Dragon Scale is only exclusively available by farming off a wild Horsey and Bagon, with Bagon being a lot easier since it's available in the wild instead of being available through fishing, which fishing is a giant pain in Gen 3, we all know that. The other example is Clamperl, since you need the Deep Sea Scale and the Deep Sea Tooth for both of its evolutions. There is a side quest in Emerald and in Ruby and Sapphire where you can go ahead to the SS Mauville, go down underwater, do a couple of puzzles, and you'd go ahead and get yourself a scanner, which you can then give to Captain Stern at the dock in exchange for one of the items. It's a one-time item, you can only get it once per file, so you will need to do this at least twice, actually 4 times because of something I'll talk about in the Fire and Leaf Green section. And there's also the King's Rocks. Although there are no Pokemon that evolve with it in these games, for the future you will need them if you're planning to evolve via trade in these games. And these can be farmed by going to Wild Hariyama and the Victory Road. The Metal Coat is only available by farming off a Wild Magnemite and Magneton, which are most commonly found in the power plant near Wildville City. And once you do that, trade evolutions aren't the worst to deal with, but you will need a link cable and a second GBA system, or a GameCube to GBA link cable and a GameCube and a copy of Coliseum or XD. I opted for the latter because I had all that equipment already, and I'm gonna need to play XD and Coliseum anyway, so might as well. The last thing is the legendaries. While Kyogre and Groudon are post-game locked in these games, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel are all obtainable, though I can understand waiting until the post-game because that puzzle is really annoying and it also takes a long time to do. As for Rayquaza, once you complete the main story section with it, you can go back to the Sky Pillar and add this ferocious dragon to the total. Although Emerald has a good chunk of the Hoenn index within the game, although needing multiple files to do so, there are a few Pokemon the devs decided to lock behind the previous set of Hoenn games, Ruby and Sapphire. Though you can get most of the exclusives in one file of either game, you will lock yourself from getting Zangoose if you only do Sapphire, or Lunatone if you're only doing Ruby. If you're like me and don't have both games, you could always just transfer one from XD and Breed, as both are available in that game, or trade with a friend who has one. Yes, I don't mind trading with others for this challenge, nor do I frown upon people using other games to obtain stuff available within a game. This is just my own personal choice to obtain everything possible within each game. Do it however you feel is right, as long as it just comes from that game. But once that's all done, we can move on to the post-game. So the main story section is officially done. We can now move on to the post-game for Emerald. As soon as we complete the main story, we receive the National Pokédex, meaning new areas and Pokemon are available in-game for us to obtain. In terms of the base Hoenn Dex though, we're still not finished. First, there's grabbing the Gift Beldum from Steven in Moss Deep City. Then, we have to use 2 files of Emerald to grab the Roman Legendaries, Latios and Latios, which I recommend using your Master Ball on and Repel Tricking to get the best odds of finding them. Finally, there's Kyogre and Groudon, which can both be found in random caves scattered across the region, which you can find using the Weather Institute. But now that we've gotten all of that, we can try and get the Sacred Prize for finishing the Hoenn Dex. But there is a problem. We have 3 files of Emerald and a file of Sapphire, with various Pokemon like the starters and legendaries, and others, scattered around the files. Not to mention that I only got close to finishing the dex on my main file, so it'd take forever plus more trades or transfers to get to that point. So how did I manage to get the entire Hoenn Dex to all 3 files? With the magical power of a little game called Pokemon Box. If you aren't aware, Generation 3 has an infamous storage system called Pokemon Box. Released only in Pokemon Center New York in America, it's incredibly difficult to get for a decent price online, if you can even find it. There are ways to circumvent this, not all of them being totally legitimate, but the method I used ended up being a funny coincidence. See, my brother's a Metroid fan, and so he likes to collect Metroid games, consoles, and other memorabilia. One such example is a Metroid GameCube that was only released in Europe. He also bought an adapter so that we could connect the European cables to our American TV system. Box was also released in PAL regions, though in a much easier way, as it was packaged in a bundle alongside Pokemon Coliseum. The GBA does have a weird limitation to where it couldn't distinguish USA English from PAL English, meaning the two could connect without any issues. So all I had to do was buy a PAL copy of Box for cheaper, use the GBA to GameCube link cable that I already had, and transfer Pokemon from one copy of Emerald to another. And I know this is already a long explanation for something so simple, but it's really not. Box requires that for Pokemon Emerald, you must enter the Hall of Fame and receive the National Pokédex to be able to deposit anything. Seems simple enough, but to withdraw other Pokemon, you need to register at least 100 Pokemon in the Dex. This isn't a problem for the first playthrough, but the second and third ones require extra time just to catch enough for 100 Dex entries. But once I got that out of the way, it was easy enough to deposit everything, withdraw them into my other files, and get the full Hoenn Dex completed for all 3 games. Thus, being able to get the Johto starters later on. But anyway, now that we've gotten the Johto starters, there's not too much left to find in these games. Firstly, there's the expanded sections of the Safari Zone, which contain a bunch of new Johto Pokemon to catch. Since it's, well, the Safari Zone, there's quite a few rare spawns, those being below 10%, that are also hard to catch, like Hoodoo, Pineco, Houndour, Miltank, Gligar, Snubbull, and Stantler. There's also Shuckle, which can be pretty annoying since you have to run over to the rocks, break them with Rock Smash, then run away to let the rocks reset and repeat the cycle. All of these encounters, and more, can be found in just 2 sections of the Safari Zone, since once you complete the main story, the main Safari Zone expands to include these new Johto mons. It will most likely take multiple attempts in the areas and therefore a lot of money to get everything, thanks to the limited amount of steps and how many you waste just getting into the new areas. But it's just interesting seeing so many Johto Pokemon popping into Hoenn, even if it's in a small section of the game. Moving on to other areas of the game that are not unlocked, there's the expanded section of the Desert Underpass, which has Wild Ditto and the opposite fossil that you didn't choose, if you so need it, and the Battle Frontier, which has a Sudowoodo you can use a Whalmer pair on to battle and catch, a Trade Meowth, which you'd need to breed since it's not in your original trainer name, and Artisan Cave, which has Smeargle. It's also a pretty decent place to grind evolutions since they have relatively high levels, which also means a chance for shinies. Okay, so apparently my games are just blessed because this is my 5th shiny. I have 3 Pokeballs! How am I supposed to attack this? I just don't know anymore. Oh wait, this thing's gonna struggle to death. I'm scared, man. I don't have any Pokeballs. Oh god, it's a bad catch. I might fail a shiny for the first time in like 3 years. No, I only have one Pokemon left. I'm actually gonna fail a shiny. I feel like I'm gonna fail it. That's not good. Okay, please work. You? No! Well, sorry, Smeargle. I tried. Well. Now what? Shiny number 5, alright. But unfortunately, my lack of planning for a surprise shiny, seriously, I didn't expect a 5th shiny after my ridiculous fire red and leaf green look, made me fail a pretty good shiny. Oh well, it's not my main goal of this challenge after all. So, Hoenn is officially done. For now. Let's move on to the Kanto games. So Fire Red and Leaf Green are a bit different from Emerald in that there's 2 game versions you have to play through. Thankfully though, there is no 3rd version to lock Pokemon for no explicable reason behind. As for the number of files you need at least 1 file of Fire Red and Leaf Green, while the 3rd is up to personal preference. I went with Leaf Green because I like the color green more than red, which is odd considering I love pink so much, but that's besides the point. Most of the tips and tricks from Emerald do carry over to these games, though there are some new exclusive gift and other special mods. Firstly, these games have way less Pokemon for you to catch and evolve. A whole 49 less to be exact, at least in the Kanto decks compared to the Hoenn one. Second, there are no special Pokeballs to increase your chances, outside of the regular Pokeballs, Great Balls, Ultra Balls, and the handy Master Ball. Third, there is a lot more freedom in these games, since Kanto focuses more on exploration and less on unlocking new areas with each badge. I mean, that's still a thing, it's always been a thing in Pokemon games, but you really can do so much in these games while having a small amount of badges. And lastly, and I feel this is the most important, the aspect of grinding for money is harder. If you don't do this time-consuming exploit, of course. For those who don't know, upon defeating all the trainers on the Nugget Bridge, you will be given a nugget as a prize, but then have to battle a trainer. If you lose to this trainer, the game won't recognize you having the nugget item, so it will repeat this interaction again. So let's say you defeat the last trainer, swap your team for a singular weak mon, and lose to him over and over again. You can stockpile nuggets until you have enough to last you the rest of the game. Pretty cool, right? And money will be necessary, as I'll mention later. Another few things to mention. One is that there are no Johto pre-evolutions or evolutions available in the main story, and same with Hoenn Pokemon. This is because they locked the 2 Pokemon daycare and the items needed for evolution behind the Serebii Islands post-game. And for Hoenn Pokemon, you have Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Why bother? And as for friendship evolutions, well, they added a really dumb block that shows the evolution happening and then stopping. I'm not kidding. They legit did that. Like, imagine being a kid and seeing that. Sheesh. Another thing is, as was the case with Emerald, there are some Pokemon you will need to obtain as a gift, or at least it's easier to do so via the gifts. First is the Kanto starters, of course, which I used each file to get 1 of each starter. Then I deposited the 2 from my other 2 files into my first file, which was my main one again, to breed extras. Next is Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, only available via the Fighting Dojo, and you will need them for breeding later on. Then there's Lapras, which, while obtainable in the post-game, is very rare, and it's better to just get it in Silph Co anyway. Afterwards is Eevee, only available in one of the Celadon apartments, and you will need to breed it later for sure. And Porygon, available by spending 6,500 coins minimum in the game corner. If you're doing this by only spending money, that's 130,000 Pokédollars. So yeah, Nugget Exploit definitely useful for this one. And definitely do this in Leaf Green, since in Fire Red it's a whopping 9,999 coins. The final gift mons are the fossils. Amine and Kabuto can be attained via the Helix and Dome fossils respectively in Mount Moon, making the other completely unobtainable in one game. So I used my second file to get the other one, while you can use the third file for an extra to save breeding time, but you will need to breed one or both anyway. Aerodactyl can be found in Pewter City's museum after getting cut, and thankfully you only need the 1. Some other important mons would be the rare Safari Zone spawns, since those range from 4% to a measly 1%, and you will need multiple of a few, specifically Cypher and Chansey. So just use the breeding strategy I mentioned before for those guys. And Snorlax, since you only get 2 per game after waking them up with a Pokeflute. Evolutions that require items, there really aren't that many. Since most of the evolution items are locked behind the Serebii Islands post-game, the only ones you have to worry about are the main stones from the original games, being the Water, Fire, Thunder, Leaf, and Moonstones. The Moonstones are only available in a limited amount of places, but because of the fact that you get so many in the game, you can just evolve everything in one file anyway. And the other stones, you can easily just buy them in the Celadon department store, so just buy as many as you need. For the trade evolutions, you will need a Game Boy and a link cable, as said before, or a copy of XD, a GameCube to GBA link cable, and a GBA. And you may be thinking, well, don't Coliseum and XD only work with the Hoenn games? Nope, Fire Red and Leaf Green are totally on the table as well. And if you're still worried about it, you could always just transfer them to the other games when you so choose. In regards to grinding in these games, unfortunately there isn't a lot of options before completing the main story. The freedom of exploration that's so exciting for getting new additions to the decks is also a curse when it comes to grinding for said new additions evolutions. Even trying to get everything that evolves in their 20s is a huge grind, considering that the strongest Pokemon are also in their 20s. I wouldn't blame anyone for not wanting to grind at all at this point, but I did. And somehow the game decided to reward me once again for doing so.
So hi, this is stupid laptop Mike Swiftly here. I found another shiny! I don't think I've ever had this luck before when grinding before. Oh god, I only have 8 Great Balls, please. Okay, it's done sporing me. I might have something for this. I'm so nervous. Alright, go to sleep. There you go. I was thinking, oh, maybe I could find a shiny Venonat because I really like Venonat, and here we are with a shiny Weepin' Bell. Oh, that's beautiful. Actually, maybe I could just do first. There we go. That's Forest Queen. That's 2 shinies in this one video. Like, am I just gonna find a shiny every time now? Oh, chlorophyll, beautiful. This is beautiful.
But that wasn't the only shiny. During a trip one time, I decided, why not do some grinding in these games? I mean, it's not like I have anything else better to do. And, well, I managed to get not 1, but 2 shinies in a 10-minute span. Unfortunately, I lost the footage for it, and it was just a raw video anyway, but look, a shiny Bellsprout. And a shiny Venonat. So cool. The last ones to really consider are the legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. They are found in the main story, but in areas that aren't necessary for story progression, so feel free to hold off on these. Though I don't recommend using your Master Ball on them, for reasons I'll explain later. But once that's all done, the Kanto Dex is really easy to complete, and you will need to complete it at least a little bit for the next section. As for the post-game of these games, you can't actually unlock it until you register 60 or more Pokemon in the Kanto Dex. We won't need to go up to 100 thankfully in these games, since in the second and third files we won't need to withdraw anything, and we already have over 100 in the first file. Plus, getting 60 Kanto Pokemon is a lot easier than expected. But now that we have the National Dex, there's a few new places to explore. In terms of the Kanto Dex, there's only really one new addition, being Mewtwo in Cerulean Cave. There's also breeding the trade Pokemon on 4 Island once you unlock it, since some of them like Farfetch, Lickitung, Mr. Mime, and Jinx, which has a new pre-evolution anyway, are only available via trade with an NPC's original trainer, instead of your own. After that, it's all Johto Pokemon found in the new Serebii Islands. There's 3 sections I consider in this part: the Johto Evolutions, the Johto Breeds, and the new Johto Pokemon. For the Johto Evolutions, there are new items scattered around the islands to get some of the trade and stone evolutions, like Blossom with the Sunstone, Politoed and Slowking with the King's Rocks, Steelix and Sizzle with the Metal Coats, Tanger with the Dragon Scale, and Porygon 2 with the upgrade. You can get up to 2 of each item in one file thanks to the Trainer Tower, but since you need 3 King's Rocks and 4 Metal Coats to include the gender variants, you will need to get the extra items from the other files, if you're choosing to evolve in these games. You will need to go deal with the post-game story in these areas anyway because of some special beasts, but we'll get to that later. There's also the friendship evolutions like Crobat and Blissey, which can be painful if you didn't prepare in advance. As for the breed mons, it's all the baby Pokemon of previous Kanto mons, like Pichu, Cleffa, Igglybuff, Tyrogue, which you may need more than 2 of in case you mess up and get him on top anyway, Smoochum, which you'll need to get an original OT Janks, as we said before, Elekid, and Magby. Finally, there's the new Johto mons, which are scattered around the island for you to catch. There's nothing particularly interesting about these mons, though some do have future evolutions and gender variants to keep in mind when catching them. Marrow and Wobbuffet also require grabbing certain incenses for them in the Lost Cave, the Sea and Lax incenses respectively, which when given to these Pokemon can produce their baby forms when breeding, those being Azurill and Wynot. Otherwise, you can go through these islands at your own pace, catching what you need and breeding for stuff that you can't obtain otherwise. while also grinding out for evolutions. While there really isn't any good place to grind on these islands, there's always Cerulean Cave and the Elite Four back in mainland Kanto. But it does involve a wild goose chase across many of the Serebii Islands, though 7 Island is the only one you don't visit, and you will have to go out of your way to catch the new Pokemon found there. But once you finish the story with the remaining members of Team Rocket, you unlock a few things in the game. Well, only really 2 things. You get the ability to deposit Pokemon into box, which is probably useless for 99% of you, and you get access to the legendary beasts. The legendary beasts are only available as roamers after completing the story, with each one being locked behind which starter you picked, being Raikou for Squirtle, Entei for Bulbasaur, and Suicune for Charmander. These roamers are even more annoying than the Eon Doom, since trapping them can force them to use Roar, which can cause a glitch that causes them to never spawn again. So yeah, definitely save your Master Ball for these 3. With all of that out of the way though, that's officially everything obtainable in Fire Red and Leaf Green. On its own, anyway. Now that we've gotten everything possible within the Generation 3 games, we must be done, right? Well, not exactly. Just because a Pokemon is unavailable within a game doesn't mean that you can't obtain an instance of one from that game. This is what I like to call the final stretch section, where you take Pokemon from the opposite version that aren't in a game and then breed them in said game. Since we've already covered everything within one game, I'll only include Pokemon that I feel are important to talk about. Firstly, in Emerald, there's a few split Evo Pokemon to consider, such as Poliwag and Slowpoke. There's also Tyrogue, which you might need to breed extra in case you miss out on one of the Evos by mistake. Then there's Pokemon who require extras to evolve in the future. These include those with Gen 4 evolutions, like Lickitung, male and female Tangela, 3 Eevee, Porygon, Togepi, Yanma, Murkrow, Mischievous, male and female Sneasel, male and female Swinub, Elekid, and Magby. There's also Execute and Cubone for their Alolan form evolutions, plus Mankey and Dunsparce for their future evolutions in Paldea. Though you will likely need to breed a lot of Dunsparce to get both of its forms, but I'll talk about that later. Finally, for some other niche cases in Emerald, like how you can't breed a Nidorina or Nidoqueen in any games, and even breeding a Nidoran female gives a chance for Nidoran male. And then there's the Kanto starters, though there's nothing too interesting outside of their starter status, although Bulbasaur had an interesting time for myself.
What? Why? This is bad. I can't actually believe that happened. I was like thinking, oh, maybe I'll get a shiny while I'm breeding it. Beautiful one too, jeez. That's number 6.
So yeah, 6 shinies so far in my crazy adventure. Unreal. As for Fire Red and Leaf Green, since the entire Hoenn decks outside of Azurill and Wynaut are unobtainable outside of breeding, there's a few examples of mons I feel are important. Starting with the split evolutions, there's Wurmple, who's a giant pain in the neck with a 50-50 chance of each Evo and the final Evos having gender variants. Ralts, which also has a future evolution, Nincada, who is unique in that you only need 1 to evolve into both Evos, Snorunt, which like Ralts has a future Evo, and Clamperl, who requires getting extra Evo items from Hoenn to trade and evolve, if you're doing so in Gen 3. As for other future Evos, you need a male and female Aipom, Gligar, Nosepass, and male and female Roselia for the Gen 4 Evos, Teddiursa and Stantler for the Hisui evolutions, and Girafarig for the Paldea evolutions. Outside of those, there's the Johto and Hoenn starters, with Chikorita being a giant pain for needing a 1 in 8 chance female, and Torchic being an even pain, because you need 3 1 in 8 chance females. Ow! There's also Volbeat and Illumise, since breeding one gives a slight chance for the others, and then Espeon and Umbreon, as you need to transfer them to another game, since Fire and Leaf Green have no day and night cycle, making them unobtainable. Feebas as well, since there's no contests in these games. And that's all the important mons, but there's still tons for you to breed in these games. Wait, what's that? I got another shiny, huh? Well, let's watch.
That's what I just don't know what to say. Wow. Just how. It's an obscure reference, but I feel like some people will know. But yeah, I'm just hatching some eggs for a female Gulpin. Yeah, I just don't know anymore.
7 shinies! Lucky number 7! Woo! Promise this is all of them, but seriously, my luck was ridiculously good throughout this video. Anyway, for the rest of this section, just consider stuff that you don't have in either game that I didn't mention in the previous sections. Breed, try and aim for the gender variants later on, and make sure to grind up money for the daycare, while the best place to grind evolutions is in the Elite Four. Though Fire and Leaf Greens is way better since it scales after you beat it the first time, while the Hoenn games don't. Now that I've talked about every Pokemon accessible via both games, we can safely say we're done with the Gen 3 part of this challenge, right? Well, not quite yet. There's still the Pokemon only available after the generations, or as I like to call them, post-gen Pokemon. There's a few subsections of this for Generation 3 with the future evolutions, mostly from Gens 4 and 6, and the regional variants with Alolan, Galarian, Hisuian, and Paldean. The Gen 4 evolutions can be done in any game post-Gen 3, but Legends is the easiest since all of them are available in one game, and the items are easily accessible. Another benefit to Legends Arceus is the fact that there's no such thing as trade evolutions. Well, there is kinda, but it's better to just pick up the items in the game and then use them than it is to, actually trade with somebody. Like, having friends? Imagine having that. All in all, you'd need 6 shiny stones for male and female Roserade and Togekiss, 4 dust stones for Mismagius and Honchkrow, 4 Razor Claws for male and female Weavile, 4 protectors for male and female Rhyperior, 2 electrizers for Electivire, 2 magmarizers for Magmortar, 4 thunderstones or access to electromagnetic area for Magnezone and Probopass, 2 ice stones or access to the Icy Rock for Glaceon, 2 leaf stones and access to the Mossy Rock for Leafeon, 2 Razor Fangs for Gliscor, 2 Dubious Discs for Porygon Z, 4 Dawn Stones for Gallade and Frostlass, and 2 Reaper Cloths for Dusknoir. Besides item-based evolutions, the only real ones I could think of from Generation 4 would be Pokemon that require a certain move in order to evolve, which is just a matter of leveling them up and then teaching that move to them later on. Same deal with Sylveon, who is available from Gen 6 and onwards, and also the Generation 8 evolutions such as Weirdeer, Ursaluna, etc. As for the Alolan forms, you must evolve them in Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, or Ultra Moon, with needing 2 Thunderstones for Alolan Raichu, 2 Leaf Stones for Alolan Exeggutor, and simply evolving a Cubone at night into Alolan Marowak. While Galarian Weezing is only available in Sword and Shield, simply through level up. And Hisuian Typhlosion is only available in Legends Arceus, also by level up. Finally, for now, we have the Paldea evolutions, being Annihilate, Farigiraf, and the Dunsparce. The Dunsparce also has a 3-segment form, which is pretty difficult to get, being a 1 in 100 chance, but particularly for Gens 3 and 4, there's a way of telling which Dunsparce will evolve into a 3-segment. Absolblog's Pokemon has a wonderful video that talks about how exactly this works, so I'll leave the link in the description alongside my own spreadsheet. Anyway, that's basically everything done for the Generation 3 Instance X, or in more simple terms, obtaining every single Pokemon available to transfer from Generation 3. At least for the main section. There are still a few bonuses I want to talk about, however. The first is a trade section. I know, trade Pokemon technically don't have any real difference with them besides their original trainer, but I did say that separate original trainers from your own can count. And so I decided to go after them myself. They do thankfully have fixed genders, so there's no soft resetting for other gender variants, and some are already evolved, meaning you might only need to get 1 or 2 instead of all of the evolutionary line. Hoenn didn't require any additional playthroughs, as Emerald only needs 3 maximum for Meowth, Gigantamax, Meowth, and Persian, while Ruby and Sapphire only needs 2 for Makuhita, Hariyama, Skitty, and Delcatty. This is the same amount as for the base challenge anyway, so hooray! However, for Fire and Leaf Green, it's a whole nother story. Fire and Leaf Green require 3 playthroughs each. Yeah, instead of the 3 playthroughs with at least 1 of Fire Red and 1 of Leaf Green, while the third was dealer's choice, you need 3 playthroughs of both Fire and Leaf Green for 6 total. This is because of a version-exclusive Nidoran trade, where you get Nidoran female in Fire Red and Nidoran male in Leaf Green. That means you need the Nidorina, Nidoqueen, Nidorino, and Nidoking with the same OT. Thankfully, these trades are very early game, only requiring the 2nd badge maximum, and transferring them to Generation 4 doesn't require being the post-game like with box or trading, so you can simply transfer them up as soon as you obtain them. One more bonus that I like to include is the Gigantamax factor, as I mentioned earlier with Gigantamax Meowth. And yeah, the reason why I feel this is a bonus instead of being part of the main challenge is not only is it very tedious to do, but I can understand people not wanting to do it because Gigantamax is a in-battle only form. Yes, you can see the Gigantamax factor in the status of your Pokemon, but why bother going through that for something you can't even see in the status page? But if you're willing to do it, in Sword and Shield's Isle of Armor DLC, you can feed any Pokemon capable of having a Gigantamax form Max Soup, which either gives it the Gigantamax factor if it doesn't have it, or removes it if it does. This does require 3 Max Mushrooms, which are found once every 3 raids. There are 16 total Gigantamax forms from Generation 1 through 3, which I won't list here, but here are all of them together. That means you'd need to do 144 raids to complete the Gigantamax collection for one region, meaning for the entirety of Generation 3, you'd need to do 288 raids, which should take half a day or so to do. I'm too lazy to do all this, given that home currently doesn't have a countdown on when it's going to shut down, but the end result should be all the Gigantamax Pokemon together. And there it is! That's everything I have for the Generation 3 Instance Deck section. Overall, this was a total of 981 Pokemon, or 1,048 if you include the bonuses. The total playthrough times are the 3 Emerald playthroughs, 2 Sapphire playthroughs, 2 Leaf Green playthroughs, and 1 Fire Red playthrough was 743 hours and 33 minutes, with a time inflating to a whopping 812 hours and 35 minutes including the additional Leaf Green and 2 Fire Reds for trading. Can this be done in a shorter time? Absolutely. There were times when I just kind of idling around, either for footage reasons or doing something else in the background, so I definitely can shave off a good 50 to 100 hours, if not more, by focusing my entire effort on it. I also got 7 shinies, which, yeah, I still can't believe I got 7 shinies. I know it sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm just stunned. But that's all for today's exploration into the 3rd generation of Pokemon. Tune in next time when I tackle the following generation, which requires us to go to Sinnoh and Johto. Generation 4. But until then, I'll see you later, fellow nerds, and I wish you all luck on your collection journeys.